But here's a challenge for you, and here's how seriously you and I must take this wisdom of God. We have to be wise. Do not be foolish. Understand what the will of the Lord is. Is that what your life has reflected so far? In this first point on the chiasm, is that what your life has been reflecting so far? Do you pour through chapter 1 to chapter 6 for every ounce of kung fu? Are you pouring through every line to be thinking about this in relation to career, this in relation to your marriage, this in relation to your sex life, this in relation to the cars you buy, this in relation to the way you think about life, about your desires, and then go to the next verse and you do the same thing again and again and again and again? Or do you just treat Ephesians as just one of many books, just read it for content? In other words, are you growing wise? Or are you, in fact, kind of becoming dumber in a sense from just reading a lot of text? Are you really growing wise from actually understanding and working on the text properly? Because 5 verse 17 says, therefore do not be foolish. And then it goes into a header passage which says, be filled by the Spirit. That results in a kind of wisdom in Christ, which is verse 21, submitting to one another reverence for Christ, which is then to be reflected in and applied in things as profound as marriages, which foreshadow the reality of Christ and the church since time immemorial, right down to the way children will live longer in the land if they obey their parents in the Lord. Okay? These bookshelf verses are pretty important to keep you on track for these next 2 weeks and the rest of your life. Okay, given all of the above, in the next points between verses 18, 19, and 20 to 24, there is therefore a particular abhorrence with the life of the Gentiles being highlighted before Paul then enters into his key central commands or injunctions of 25 to 32. Okay, so you got your 18, 19, then in 20 to 24, and then 25 to 32. So that's really the rest of the sermon for today, right? You got 18, 19, 20 to 24, then 25 to 32. So let me go to the B pair. The B pair is, do I need to write it out for you, just in case, yeah? It's easier for some of you. So that's B, and then, that's B, and that's B. Okay. So in the B pair, we see 4 verse 18, 5, 7 to 14. I put a title there as not partnering in the darkened and alienated from the life of God. So not partnering the darkened and alienated from the life of God, since you are now light in the Lord. Okay? Right. So 4 verse 18, they are darkened in their understanding, alienated from... Are you guys putting up 4:25 to 32? Why are you putting up 4:25 to 32? We're looking at 4:18 to 19. Well, we're looking at 4:18 and 5:7 to 14. Okay, so 4, that's a bit too far for me to see, but I'm glad I picked that up. 4:18, they are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God. So you can see the highlights there I've highlighted for you. See how the Gentiles or the non-Christians or unbelievers are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God. And so therefore, if you read almost seamlessly, 4:18 to 5:7 to 14, it almost reads like just a single passage. So therefore, do not become partners with them. Why? Because, well, you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord, for 5 verse 8. So walk as children of light. Why? Because if you're children of light, then the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true, and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. So then take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. So you see, their work, or the life of the unbeliever, verse 18, is going to be, as we'll see very soon in verse 19, is going to be unfruitful. So there's no reason for you to want to be part of that. In fact, it is, verse 12, shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. In fact, when anything is exposed by light, it becomes visible, and anything that becomes visible is light, and then so forth. So verse 7 to 14, if you look at it, belongs together. Let's start with that first. Since 7 to 10 and 11 to 14 are essentially parallel, but you might say that 11 to 14 is kind of stepping up. Where the second time the point is reiterated, you have a bit of a step up. So for instance, verse 7 and 11 to 12. So you look at verse 7 and verse 11 to 12. 7 is, do not become partners with them. In 11, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. So it calls for more, rather than just restating a point in verse 7. For it is shameful even to speak of things that they do in secret. And then you have 8, then 13 to 14. So you'll see, at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. 13 to 14. But when anything is exposed by the light, because now you've been exposed, so now you are light in the Lord, then it becomes visible. So you have to behave the way you have become. So now you are light. Anything that becomes visible is light. So these lines emphasize the transformation in the believers that has actually happened. At one time you were, 5 verse 8 says, right? 5 verse 8 also says, but now you are. Now this means, of course, that they must then be as they are, or do as they are. So 5, 8 to 10, walk as children of light. And verse 14, matching it, it says, awake, O sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. So he's calling them in these verses, this pair in fact, to walk as what they are, since they have been already shone upon. So the purpose then of these points is to contrast against the foolishness of the world's thinking, especially in Paul's highlighting of the total depravity, the lostness of their state, 4 verse 18. Look at how he points out the ignorance that's in them. And then in the matching pair later, in your 5, 8 to 14, what he does, 5, 7 to 14, sorry, what he does is not only show the darkness that was in them, but also shows how that work is unfruitful in comparison to what happens when light is shone, so that now you can produce the fruit, verse 9, that is pleasing to the Lord. Can you see that? So what is implicit for 18, which then becomes explicit in verse 19, is now made explicit at the end of the whole chiasm in 5, 7 to 14. The fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true, verse 9. So to you, you may not be very appreciative of this, because you're just like, oh, I don't get it, it's just going on and on and on and on and on. But that's because you don't get the logic of Christianity. Christianity is not simply personal salvation. Christianity is an abhorrence for the state of the world, and a love for, a desire for, like the psalmist, for the good things that God brings to the world that is going to be destroyed for its desires and its horrible, sinful nature. It is the ignorance that is abhorrent in 4 verse 18. And that ignorance gives them a commitment to a desired lifestyle, because they are hardened and hardened against God, 4 verse 18 as well. And now for the Christian, therefore, in contrast to their former alienation, you look at 2 verse 12, for instance, remember that you were at that time. Remember from chapter 2? At that time, you were, 2 verse 12, you were at that time, 2 verse 12, 2 verse 12, you were at that time separated from Christ. Well, I'm sure you all know your text. You were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers, covenants, promise, see, having no hope and without God in the world. See, in contrast to their former alienation in chapter that was depicted in chapter 2, and here you see 4 verse 18, see the same words, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that's in them due to the hardness of heart. You look at 4 verse 18, you can see that what's done is he's combined 2, 1 to 3 with his 2 verse 12. Can you see that? So it kind of summarizes everything very nicely. So it's very difficult to see Paul as some guy who's just randomly writing thoughts that come up through his head. That's not how letters work, and that's not how apostolic letters work. We have what we have here is not just writing. What we have here is scripture. So that means when I preach it, if I just preach it as just, I don't know how to demo the other way. It's just, okay, the way I would preach it if I didn't know what I was doing would be, if I read it as, say, when I read 2 verse 12, I just go, you were separated from Christ. Okay, main point. Don't worry about the alienated commonwealth of Israel. That's very bad, Rayla. And then when I get to 4 verse 18, I just say, alienated from the life of God, as if it's a new idea or it's just another idea. Or when I did 2:3, I get very excited because 2:3 is all about the sin stuff, okay? Whereas what Paul is doing is literally almost writing a textbook. And if you know your lecturers in uni or whatever, you'd want them to be knowledgeable about how the syllabus or the progression of knowledge works. So you want them to be clear that your 4 verse 18 is really almost a combo of 2:3 and 2:12. Because you can see that, right? 2:3, you'll have your ignorance that's in them, but especially the hardness of heart. And the 2:12 is an alienation that's paired with that. See how important it was that when we did chapter 2, we actually talked through things like whether or not 2:1 to 10 was the key passage or 2:12 to 22 was the key passage. We actually worked through, what's really the bobbing of the bombers. And I created that little stupid term to make sure that you understood how it was moving up, not moving down, whereas in your brain it's moving down. See how for Paul, when he writes stuff, it's not just a story that's repeating itself. Whereas when you think of Christianity, you just think, sin is sin is sin is sin is sin lah. Don't repeat. Jesus saved me, done. What else is there to learn? Christianity is becoming wise to these definitions, these details that result in you being able to shine as light. The details are important. So coming back again to my point, and to Paul's point rather, your 4:18 is highlighting this abhorrent state where due to the hardness of heart, 4:18, what you have here is an ignorance of God where they have no hope, they have no God, and therefore their lifestyle is the way it is. Contrasted with 4 verses 20 to 24, where now they have learned Christ. And that's actually a very, very important argument. I'll go through that in detail in exegesis, because he's not talking about here just some random conversion. He's talking about a historical change that's happened in a way that your wedding is important, or the world wars of the world changed his history of the universe. Okay? So you learn Christ is a pretty important, almost technical statement about what has happened to them. Now, the argument he's making from this and everything implied from the Gospel of chapter 1 to 4 is made clear in the parallel point in 5:7 to 14. Therefore, do not become partners with them. That's implicit to a large extent in chapter 4, in your 4:18, right? They are darkened, they are alienated due to the hardness of heart. That's implicit. But 5:7 to 14 makes it explicit. Therefore, do not become partners with them. But it's pretty clear anyway if you understood 4:18's abhorrent characterizations. I mean, why would you ever want to be alienated from the life of God? See? So the chiasm only just makes it easier, not clearer necessarily. So therefore, do not become partners with them. 5 verse 7, they are darkness, they're ignorant, they're hardened against God. It makes no sense whatsoever to live that way. And even more so when God's gracious redemptive work is appreciated. Therefore, 5 verse 7 to 8, therefore do not become partners with them, etc. But now you are light in the Lord before you were darkness. Remember 2:7 to 10. Now that you believers are what you are, then do as you are. 5 verse 8 to 9. Be as you are. 5 verse 8 to 9. Walk as children of light, etc. In summary, 5 verse 10. Try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. So that matches very nicely the realities of 4 verse 17 to 18 so far. Try to do what is pleasing to the Lord as opposed to being ignorant due to a futile hardening of your heart, which we'll cover all in exegesis. So Romans 12:1 to 2 is a good summary reference. I appeal to you, therefore, by the mercies of God, brothers, to present your bodies. See how the Gentiles present their bodies to what is futile, because futility is really related to idolatry. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your rational, actually the word that's rational, logical, worship, which ties perfectly into what you understand here in 4:17, 5:17. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. The Christian life is not and never was intended to be just forgiven and over with, as we can see from these verses. The Christian life is not just you're forgiven, done. It's at least you're forgiven to be wise. Well, what does it mean to be wise? Wow. If you think about it, that's a pretty big topic. In fact, Romans 12:1-2 is pretty open-ended in some sense, right? It's not because, it's defined by worship, what's holy and acceptable to God, living sacrifice, which is an Old Testament term. But it does say, by the renewal of your mind, by testing, test what? Test everything, man. You may discern what is the will of God. See, Christianity is not, you're safe, don't have to follow rules, follow what you want, you'll still be safe. Christianity is, every verse that we've read in Ephesians, for instance, that's your kung fu for how to live. Career, sex life, cars, what you do in your life, what you eat, what you wear. Of course, life is not what you eat, what you wear. But Jesus is saying there in Matthew that you shouldn't be obsessed about these things because God will give them to you. But in light of what he has given in the gospel, now you should be thinking, not in an obsessed way about those things, but in a way that is concerned with God about those things. What is acceptable and perfect. So the Christian life is never just you're forgiven, over. Get it over with, right? The Christian life is a life, in fact, created by God for the sole purpose of his worship. In other words, Genesis 1-3, the Christian life is a life for God. That's what's on view in 4:17 to 5:17. The chiasm puts that on view. The chiasm forces you to see that the gospel is not just I'm saved. The gospel is I live for God. How? In a way that pleases him.